Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and the time of the AK is upon us. With massive buffs being deployed across the category, it's time to check out which is the best in the 545 caliber. So stick around and let's get going. Alright, so BSG have made some decent changes to the AK category. They've made some mods really good, and they've changed up the meta a little bit, but we'll get into that in a moment. Just before we start, let's have a quick look through what our choices are within this caliber, and then we can make a decision about exactly how we're going to break it down. So to start with, as usual, I've linked search to common piece of ammo to the BTs, and this shows us all the different rifles that we have the option to choose between. So we have the RPK at the bottom, which kind of stands alone, and then 9 other weapons, which are all various assault rifles, including 3 variants of the 74U, the B and the N and the standard, which is the short version, which I'm not really going to focus on. Out of the others, the best way to choose between these things is to really have a look at the stats and go and look at their base recoil to begin with, and this kind of gives us a bearing of where to start. What I mean by the base recoil is if you take any weapon and bring it into the preset system and remove all of the other parts, you're just left with the core base weapon piece. What happens then is you've got a number of recoil, which is the starting recoil that the gun uses. This is important because this is what all subsequent calculations for recoil will be done from, as discussed in my recoil video previously if you want to know a bit more about how that works. But for today, we'll just move straight into figuring out the best one of these. So we can see here there's quite a big range in terms of the base recoils, the RPK with 131 being the best and the AK-105 being the worst, and the others range somewhere between 142 and 145. This gives us some clue as to what's going to be good, and it shows why the RPK is so popular, because it already starts with a little bit of an advantage. Once you stick on a stock or a compensator, that recoil can become quite low quite quickly. In this particular case, I looked at a couple of examples because the RPK is the lowest base recoil with 131. That gets you to 71 at stock just using the attachments that it comes with, 62 using level 2 mods, which is the DTK from Skier 2 and the RK4 from Skier 2, 55 with level 3 mods, which is the SRVV from Mechanic 3, the AFG from Peacekeeper 3 and the MOE Carbine and Pad from Peacekeeper 3. That then becomes 52 if you have the short barrel min recoil version and 47 for the long barrel min recoil version. Now 47 is pretty good, to be honest with you, but it's not actually the best that we can physically get. If we look between all of the other weapons in here, we've really got 2 categories. So we've got folding stocks and non-folding stocks. So what does this mean practically for our builds? So if you're using a folding stock, which really is anything with an S in it, and also the M and the 105, if we go into the preset system for this, what this means is that the best stock that you can get access to, there's really not that many. You have to use the AK-74 PT lock, and then you're going to be using the PT3, which is the best stock for this particular combination. Now this stock is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not the best stock that you could possibly use. So if we have a look at one that has a fixed stock instead and do exactly the same thing, we get a few more options compared to that on the folding stock. So if we look into here, we can choose any of these, and the way that you get minimum recoil is if you use the ME adapter for the AK. Within here, you get access to all of the buffer tubes that you would for various other weapons, and usually the one that you'd choose would be the advanced tube, but in this case actually, the Mesa Crosshair has -5% rather than 4% of the advanced tube. So the advanced tube is the one that you normally use on an M4. So let's use that for the moment, and in here, the minimum recoil stock that you can get is this one, the PRS Gen 3. Now the issue with this is that it absolutely destroys your ergonomics to do this combination, and I think instead of doing this, practically speaking, I would advise most people instead just to use the Zhukov stock, which is 1 more recoil. As you can see up here, it takes from 73 to 74 in this combination where we haven't added anything else, but it takes your ergonomics up by 16, which I think is a price that I'm willing to pay. Now that we know that the fixed stocks are slightly better than the folding stocks, let's go and look at the thing that was changed probably the most significantly out of the whole category. So previously it used to be the CMRD handguard, which was the one that was the meta one. This has changed now, and now it's the Troy. So this is all about the Troy combo. This has the most recoil reduction out of all of the handguards. And basically on every single AK, you're now going to want to add the RRD and the Troy handguard, and then you're going to put on whatever grip you want. So if you want to get min recoil, then usually you use the classic RK2. But you might want to use something different if you don't want to have your ergo destroyed again. So if you go for the min recoil and you go for RK2, and you also go for the horrible mass combination on the back, you end up with a disgusting ergonomics, but you end up with a decent recoil. Now I went through and checked out the min recoil build for every single one of these guns. So the RPK we already knew was at 47. For the AK-105, it's no surprise that this comes out of one of the worst with 52. It turns out that basically this is the only one that can't use the Troy either. So not only does it have a bad base, but it also can't use the new best in slot handguard. The AK-74M has a 47 min recoil, the AKS-74N has a 48 min recoil, the AKS-74 also has 48 min recoil, and then the AK-74 has 44 min recoil as a fixed stock, and the AK-74N has 43 as its min recoil, which is the best in this particular category as of this time, because the AK-74N firstly has one of the lowest bases, it had one less base recoil than some of the other weapons. It also can use the Troy and the RRD like all the others, but then it can also use the ME4 Mesa Cross PRS combo because it has a fixed stock. Now, is the AK-74N expensive? Well, actually not really. If you check the flea market, they're only going for about 25 to 30,000 like any other AK. And I think firstly, this is because they're fairly plentiful, to be honest with you. Secondly, there are actually some really good barter trades for this weapon. So if we go and look at traders only, there are a couple of ways that you can get this. So Prapor actually sells one for 40,000 rubles, just straight off the bat. And this one's at Prapor level 2. There's another Prapor level 2 version as well, which is a barter trade instead, which is for 5 Apollo cigarettes. So if we go and have a look at those, these are only going for about 4 to 5,000. So you can easily get an AK for 15 to 20,000 just using these cigarettes instead. And then there's one final one, but you also need to remove operational only. And there's one final barter, which is this one, which is 26,000, which is the mechanic version. And what this gives you is just literally the base. It's the one that we were talking about before, and it has 144 recoil, so it allows you to build it up completely from scratch. I think the cigarettes trade is probably the best one, but it really depends on what you want to do, to be honest, and kind of how prices are looking at the time. There is also this other one from Peacekeeper for 6 GP coins, but this is probably not one that we're really looking to do. This is one that's already kind of modded out and built up, but this comes with the ME4 adapter. Maybe it's interesting for somebody, especially if you've got lots of GP coins, but I think there's probably better things that you can do with it than this one. So what can we do with this weapon? Let's bring it into the preset system as always, and we can start taking a look. Now, the first budget build that I would recommend really is one that is focused on level 2 traders only. So the DTK1 is from Skier 2, and you can also get the butt pad on the back of the stock, which comes from Prapor 2. And this takes you down to 71 already without actually really doing anything. If you want to take this further, and again, if you only have level 2 traders, you can in theory switch out the handguard. You can get the MOE AKM from Peacekeeper 2. If you don't have Peacekeeper 2, you can use the AK100 series foregrip instead, because this still gives you a foregrip under here. But we're going to use the AKM one because it gives you slight recoil reduction. Then these days you are actually allowed to buy the 4.1 M-Lock from Mechanic 2, which is very, very handy. And then in here, the best one that I find these days for doing budget builds at low trade levels is the RK4, which is pretty much the only available 2 recoil left that's actually on the traders. And this comes from Skier 2 as well. So we can actually get this down to 65 using pretty much stuff from the traders. Now with the AK-74N, you don't need to have a Bastion rail, so you don't need a rail on the top. You can get the Bastion from Skier 1. Remember to remove the rear sight, otherwise it won't let you add it. But when you add the Bastion, this gives you a Picatinny rail. But given the fact that the AKN has this side-mounted thing, you can actually attach scopes on here. So you don't really need that rail in theory. But the Bastion does actually give a very small amount of recoil reduction. Now, I don't think it's really worth it for the money that you're going to spend on it. But in theory, you can get this down to 63 recoil just using the parts that you have available to you at level 2 traders. Now, in terms of pistol grips and ergonomics, you can technically increase this a little bit more using the saw grip, because that's available at Peacekeeper 2 these days. And that then gets you to 61 and 63, which is probably the best that you can get in terms of ergonomics and recoil without going above level 2 traders. And if we just quickly go to find parts here and have a look through, we've bought the gun already. We said this is probably going to be about 15 to 20,000. And this comes with a magazine and the stock and the gas tube. So these pieces we don't have to buy because we already had them and they came with the gun. So this is going to come to 46,000 worth of mods from the traders. This is pretty expensive. So the gun's going to be like 65k, which is twice the price of the actual weapon itself. And a lot of this cost comes from the foregrip and from this Bastion, which I said you don't really need. You got this attachment point for side-mounted optics. You don't really need this. So if you want to cut down on some of the cost, get rid of this. Don't actually use a foregrip, or use a foregrip that's much, much cheaper. And this will get you down to about 28,000 in theory. And so that's going to be much more palatable for you. Now, if we do a complete overhaul of the weapon, putting on the RRD, we're going to switch the gas tube over to the Troy, which we now know is the best in slot. We're going to put on the best in slot recoil reducing vertical foregrip. I'm going to take off the magazine just for cleanliness. We'll put on the Bastion. And in terms of stocks, we're going to add this horrible combination, the ME4, the Mesa Crosshair, and the Gen 3, which we'll stick on here. And then in terms of pistol grips, we can choose any of them really. There's quite a few pistol grips that are all the same now. I think the MOE one is the lightest with 12 ergonomics. So this is the best that you can get with the RP1. And so this takes you to 53 ergo and 43 vertical recoil, which is what I was pointing out before. But our ergonomics, yeah, you know, I said it wasn't that great. 53 is actually not too bad for what it is. But in my opinion, if you want to get a meta build and you want to increase this ergonomics so that you can kind of snap the sights, and especially if you're using an optic that's fairly chunky, you can end up in the sort of like 40s, which is going to be kind of slow. What I would advise is, if money is no object, you want to shift this over to, no pun intended, the Fortis shift, which will take you up to 60. And then, as we said before, you switch over this entire block unit over to the Zhukov. So that will take you to 76 and 48. So we're basically giving up 5 recoil points for gaining an enormous amount of ergonomics, which I think is definitely worth it. And this is the one that I would use, to be honest with you. So if we go to find the parts and buy this one and all the pieces for it. So again, we could buy the AK for about 20,000 on its own. We had to buy all of these parts because we're not really using anything. Bear in mind that you do actually save about 5,000 because the parts that you replace on here can then be sold. But we're talking about 144,000's worth of attachments as well. So 141 plus the gun. So it's going to be about 160,000 all in, which for a meta weapon with 48 recoil and a really good ergonomics, honestly, I don't think it's actually that bad. It really isn't that bad at all. It's actually pretty decent and usable, you know? Now, one thing that's really good about having this high ergonomics is this allows you to use some of the bigger magazines. So people really love using the 60 rounders because it gives you just a great amount of firepower in fights and the ability to take on multiple enemies, especially if you're a solo player. You know, taking on 3 opponents when you're using 20 round VSS mags for another weapon is very difficult, and I'm sure we've all been there and done it and tried to take on too many people at once. With a 60 rounder, you really don't have to worry too much, and without using one of the box magazines, which absolutely annihilates your ergonomics, so ours goes down to 52 even using that. With the 60 rounder, they also fit into a 1x2 pouch slot. This takes our ergonomics down to 60. Now, I was looking at playing with a middle ground recently, which is super interesting, which is using this one, the 6L26 45 round magazine. The beauty of this is that it doesn't hurt your ergonomics nearly as much as using the big box mag for 60. So you can see you actually get 8 more ergo, and it's only 5 worse than using a 30. And one other great thing about this is that they have added a new rig. So if you look at this AK setup that I was running, they've added a new rig here, which is a budget rig, and it allows you to have 2 3 slots and 2 2 slots. And what is great about this is that previously you really could only use the Alpha or one of the armored rigs, whereas now you have an option for using a budget rig for the 3x1s, which then allows you and frees you up to put something else on as your armor. So now you don't just have to use the Alpha rigs, you can use this CSA. And the difference in price is not huge, but material. So it's 30,000 versus the CSAs, which are only 10. So you're saving about 20k moving over to this. And if you can just somehow squeeze together your loadout, like I like to do, and then you could just about get away with this. So I put a bunch of stuff in pockets. So I have the car medkit and 2 single-use items in the chest. Then I have 1 45 rounder with 1 45 round space spare, which will then be switched in and out as I reload. So this gives you 90 rounds within the weapon itself between 2 magazines, which is quite good, right? That's the equivalent of having 1 in the gun and 2 outside if you're using 30s. So I think this is definitely a viable choice and just allows you to squeak a little bit extra out of your builds and your entire loadout when you're trying to run it. Just before we move on to a little bit of gameplay, I just wanted to show out the recoil in the hideout. So this is using my meta version, which is the 48 recoil. And as you can see, it's eminently controllable. This is partly down due to the fire rate of the AK itself, which is really quite nice in terms of recoil. If I don't move the mouse at all, you end up with this kind of spray pattern. But because of the distancing between the bullets, it makes it much easier to actually keep on target, because as it bounces, you get the opportunity to move the mouse and kind of adjust for it, which is harder with something like the M4 and potentially even the HK and some of the faster firing weapons, just because they kind of spray out of control too quickly or whatever, which is one of the small advantages of the AK, and you can save a few bullets. So with that said, let's get into the gameplay and have fun. Heard you got a kid too, spend your time wisely and congratulations. Yeah, that's the thing, right? My time is like tricky. Yeah, today I was a bit late because she's not a very sleepy baby. She slept for like an hour and she was still sleeping, and we were like, oh my god, like this is the first time ever that this has happened. Ooh. Poor friends. We were just chilling out, you know? We were just chilling out, chatting. These poor guys ran into me. Okay, well that gets rid of 2 people. They didn't actually look that geared. That's why I really like Steam Audio, by the way. I was just like... I just could hear them like tracking all the way around from one side to the other. I actually forgot to put a laser on this gun, by the way. I should have put a laser on. I mean, somebody might just appear from nowhere. We'll see. Oh dear. They're running very, very low level kits. Poor dudes. I mean, I'll take the consumables because they're not going to get them back. Basically, I'll just drop all their stuff like on the floor. I took a double take then. Whoa, this guy's got exfil. And it's find in raid, so he must find it in a box, which means it's not his. So I'm going to take that. So it's going to be difficult for people to pick up their kit because it's just like strewn all over the place. I'm not going to go hide it, but like, again, MRE. I'll take one of those in the water as well. Yeah, so like, look at this. It's just a mess, right? It's going to be really hard for people to grab their guns and that kind of thing. So... So if you learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, please consider dropping a like and sub as it helps with visibility for those who haven't found me yet on YouTube. To see when I'm streaming, you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch, where I'm currently live twice a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the Scav Talk podcast, which you can check out in the link in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.